Is YSG, that's Yi Seong-Gye, still good in 2024? Well, in this video, I'm going to share everything you need to know. Whether it's, should I put sculptures into him? What are the best talents? What equipment should I use? Who should I pair him with? And more. Stick around in this video for all the details you need. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, and I have been using Yi Seong for a very long time in Rise of Kingdoms, and I've pulled down a pretty moderate amount of kills with this commander, 53 million. Pretty decent, although he's not one of the main commanders that I currently use. So in this video, I'll get into that nuanced conversation around where is Yi Seong good? Should you still use him if you have him? And should you go put sculptures in him today in 2024 and beyond? And the short version of the answer is that Yi Seong does something kind of magical that is a little bit different than what you might see on other commanders. That is that he has a circle area of effect damage ability. Now, this only becomes available when you max every single skill on Yi Seong. And that is, of course, a little bit tricky to do. Now, if you are in the early game and you're thinking, he is one of the first commanders that shows up on the Wheel of Fortune. It's right after Richard I, right? If you're thinking, man, I'd really like to go work on Yi Seong, if you're in the early game, I think that's a fine thing to do. If you wanted a project to do before you got to the end game, if you can be extremely patient, then I would say it is worth waiting until you get to the end game, having as many gems as possible, as many universal legendary commander sculptures as possible, because although Yi Seong's area of effect damage that does 1700 damage factor to 5 targets is pretty sweet, you could instead just work on Zhuge Liang, who does 2000 damage factor to 5 targets in a circle, and also troops hit by this skill deal 15% less damage for 3 seconds. So Yi Seong is a powerful commander, and lots of people in the endgame still use him. However, the weirdness is that he is already outclassed. However, he's good enough to still be used. So if you're looking for something to do in the early game because you really want to invest somewhere, you can put that into Yi Seong and you can use him in the end game, but just know that there will be better. Now, that end game becomes available to you in KVK Season 3. If you don't even know what KVK is yet, then you're very much in the early game. It stands for Kingdom versus Kingdom. And there is a special building that becomes available in KVK Season 3. It is called the Museum. The Museum is the great equalizer of the early game commanders and the late game commanders. And what it lets you do is it lets you get a buff onto these commanders that are, for the most part, very outclassed in the late game to make them more comparable, but not necessarily meta in the end game. So if we get a look over here, YSG, when you put the Museum buff onto him, you start with 10% archer defense and 3% skill damage bonus, which is pretty decent. And then when you get the second level of this buff, you get 20% defense and a 5% skill damage bonus. That's pretty freaking sweet. All right. So this is a part of what makes Yi Seong really viable in the end game. And although we'll be talking about pairings later, and you can always use the timestamps in this video to jump to whichever part you want. And by the way, if you're getting value from this video, do me the honor of throwing a like on here and subscribing to the channel. But the thing that's kind of neat about Yi Seong is that in the early game, a lot of people use him in pairings other than archers. That's right, he only really has one skill that cares about archers, and it's the second skill, which gives him a boost to archer attack for 3 seconds. So a lot of people will take Yi Seong in the early game and pair him with, for example, they use Minamoto Yi Seong secondary. Sounds a little weird, but the majority of this kit actually works. So in the end game, because of the Museum, that is not viable. That is not viable because that Museum buff of 20% defense only works if you use him in an archer pairing. So your aspiration will ultimately be to put Yi Seong with archers. Now, in terms of his overall kit, We talked about the 1700 damage factor and how it hits 5 targets. However, keep in mind that for each additional target you hit, you lose 15% damage. Now, you're doing more total damage because you're hitting more things, but AoE damage would be absolutely insane and like stupid busted if it just like your damage was just straight up scaling up with more targets that you hit in like a literally like for each additional target to like double the damage that you would have originally had. Like what I'm trying to say is that reducing the damage for each additional target is an important mechanic to not make area of effect damage completely busted. Now, there are commanders that don't have this mechanic, like how I covered this in my Ethelfled video. Also, buy bars, AoE doesn't have the 15% reduction, but those are some secrets that we can talk about in other videos. Again, subscribe if you're getting value. So, second skill, 10% chance when you launch a basic attack. What a basic attack is when you directly target an enemy. That is a basic attack, okay? Now, if you're not directly targeting somebody, this can't trigger. So if you're running and you're getting hit, this will never trigger. But when you launch a basic attack, 10% chance to gain 100 rage and get 100% bonus archer attack for 3 seconds. This is an internal cooldown of 5 seconds. So the very, very basic napkin math would say this triggers once every 15 seconds or so. The third skill is only for garrisoning your city and does very, very little. Although it's cool to increase your attack by 10% because that impacts all troop types, infantry, archers, siege, cavalry. The watchtower attack is basically irrelevant on here. And the fourth skill is going to boost your skill damage by 50%. Now, this is really cool. It's all skill damage, whether it's the primary commander, the secondary commander. It could be instant proc damage. Basically, that's damage that says, hey, you have a 10% chance to instantly deal X amount of damage. Like all skill damage is boosted by 50% here. That's a big number. That is a lot of skill damage boost. And in many ways, this commander set the benchmark for what it really means to boost skill damage. Now, keep in mind, you have to have this commander maxed for that active skill to be hitting 5 targets and to be in a circle. If you do not have this skill max, you still hit 5 targets, but you only do 1400 damage factor, and it is a wedge, not a circle. So getting Yi Seong maxed is critical. Like this is a project, like some commanders, the expertise is like fine, or you don't even want it. But this is a commander where like you really do need to move all in. Like if you're gonna start this project, you need to aspire to finish it, and you ideally need to aspire to finish it before you get to KVK Season 3. Now, in terms of what talent builds you use on your Yi Seong, when you decide like, hey, I actually want to go for this guy and I am going to use him as the primary, I'm just going to show this to you on a different commander because I think I've got both of the builds in here. But for the open field, it is very uncontroversial that this is the build, the correct build to use in the open field. The reason this is so uncontroversial is that it's doing a couple things. First of all, it is generating rage. And I won't get into all the details in this video, but generally speaking, commanders that generate rage benefit from generating even more rage. This is a very nuanced conversation, and for a long time, the Rise of Kingdoms community was very afraid of generating too much rage, and for good reason. It turns out there's a secret rage limit in the game. You can only get 220 rage per turn max. And if you thought that that was all, we're not done yet, because rage reductions, skills that reduce your rage in a given turn, apply after your rage is limited to 220. In other words, the most rage you could get is 220, and a rage reduction will reduce from the 220 number. So overrage does not protect you from rage reductions, is what I'm trying to say. So because this commander is generating rage on that second skill, 10% chance to generate 100 rage, it turns out the combination of having Rejuvenate, which generates rage from your active skills on the primary and secondary commander, having Feral Nature, trigger and generating extra rage, all these different ways of generating rage makes your skill cycle so fast, it's super valuable. Now, for that reason, you also want to generate rage from Razor Sharp, We go in on the right side of the archer tree for Venomous Sting to do more skill damage. You're going to want to pair with a high skill damage combo. The other reason we go to the right side of the archer tree is because there is March Speed here, and you really need the March Speed on Yi Seong. He has none. None in his skills. It's his biggest downfall. So this March Speed is very critical. And then we go and we get this extra attack over here. Attack stat, like percent attack, will increase the damage you deal from normal attacks, counter attacks, and skill damage. So that's why attack percent's really nice, rather than prioritizing your normal attack damage. That is, by the way, the combination of the damage you deal directly to the thing you're targeting and the damage you deal as counter attacks. Okay, so we put 1 point over here, and that's the build for your Yi Seong. Prioritize getting Rejuvenate as the first thing. The next thing you do might actually be going to Venomous Sting, because March Speed is so goated. You probably want to go pick that up. And this is the open field build. It's so uncontroversial. There are other things in here you could do, but I don't like them. You could go and get Naked Rage, but you basically deal more skill damage and take more skill damage. You should not get Latent Power. The wording here, I recognize, is very confusing to new players of the game, but Latent Power only enhances damage over time effects. You have none on Yi Seong. So this does literally nothing if you take it on Yi Seong. The wording here, people think, oh, 6% more skill damage. No. 6% more damage over time. By the way, like I said, if you're getting value from this video or you're learning things, smash that subscribe button. So from here, the alternate build is going to be an archer build. I don't like this build compared to the rage build. I think the rage build is better. Do this. But if you wanted to be contrarian, or if you were going to run rallies with your Yi Seong, this build is actually better. So what this build is doing is it's sacrificing the stats and rage restoration. It's sacrificing some attack stat over here in order to go and get the left side and top part of the archer tree. So like, what do you even gain? Well, you do have a chance when you have a full archer march, 10% chance to do 200 extra damage factor. It ain't much. Cooldown of 3 seconds, okay? But instant proc damage is nice. And remember, this only works if you're full archers. And also remember, this commander does have a lot of percent skill damage boosts, which makes this do more damage. In addition, whistling arrows. If this commander's troop contains only archer units, when you launch basic attacks, remember that's when you directly target an enemy, you have a 10% chance to get 25% bonus damage. That's very good for 2 seconds. The part of the reason this is not as good in the open field is that like your enemy might walk away from you when this triggers. So this is great for rallying, okay? Great for garrisoning, not great for open field. And I wouldn't even say this is necessarily great for garrisoning. It's like acceptable. This is really just like a rally thing. So this tree and this build, this is your rally build, your contrarian open field build, but like just stick with this one, in my opinion. Now, I recognize that Yi Seong also has the Garrison tree, and that begs the question of like, well, wait a minute, Chisgule. What if you want to garrison with Yi Seong? So the only reason you garrison with Yi Seong as the primary is if you actually have a really, really, really good archer equipment and really, really high count of archers, okay? For the most part, if you're in the early game, you're going to be putting a commander like not Guan Yu, what am I saying? Not Guan Yu, Sun Tzu on the wall at the start of the game. Infantry commander. But then you're going to follow that up and replace him with ultimately, it's going to be a Charles Martel. All right. Now, the reason you would use Charles Martel as the primary is that he is going to boost your all damage by 30%. So your goal is to have Charles as the primary. You boost your damage by 30%, and then you hit him with fat Yi Seong AoE damage. That's like the way you would want to run that combo. I have actually done that before, and it works, okay? Now, with that said, that Garrison is very outclassed, but if you had to use Yi Seong as the Garrison commander, you have several options. The first is to look at, hey, what do I do if my city is getting swarmed, okay? And that is a weird situation. If your city is getting swarmed, you're probably in trouble. I have made dedicated videos about like what to do in that situation. And depending on how heavy that swarm is, you might even ditch the points over here and know where to turn, because as I mentioned before, there's a limit to how much rage you can generate per turn. And if you're getting swarmed, you're going to be at that limit. Like if 12 marchers are swarming you, you're going to be at that limit. But this talent build for city defense, if you're getting swarmed, the goal is to reduce the damage you take from the swarm. Know thy enemy is the talent that does that the best. 9% damage taken reduction is insane. 3 talent points for 9% damage taken reduction is busted, folks. It's busted. We also, of course, take rapid fire to punish with counterattack, and arrows knocked, because if you're getting swarmed, you're probably going to get low. When you get low, 9% attack is going to look really good. All right. This is a build you can use to defend your city. If, again, you think you're crazy swarmed, carve off these points and you can put them somewhere else. All right. It's 3 talent points, lots of different places you could go. You could get archer stats. You could go and just get universal stats. Okay. A lot of different ways to go and do that. If you wanted to punish a rally, you have Yi Seong as the primary for defending your city. You're an archer player. You have really great archer equipment, maybe a good archer armaments, etc. Then this is probably the build you use. And this tree, the skill tree, is very good against the rally, as it turns out, because generating rage is going to be super valuable. And also, the stats here apply to all troop types, and all troop types are represented when you're defending your city, right? So you're getting these garrison talents, which per point are actually insanely valuable. And also, you're getting this tree, the skill tree. From there, I like the extra rage generation. And once again, when you get low, you do want to increase the attack of all your troop types. That's 9% attack once you're below 50% of troop strength. So punish, this is called Punish Rally here. And it's funny, I have this set on the Clarity build. It's called the Clarity build because of this talent over here. But I wouldn't actually use this in the open field. And I also don't use Yi Seong as the primary anymore because, well, I've moved on from that. And that brings me to kind of an interesting point. Let's talk a little bit about pairings. So TLDR, I didn't feel like using a reset here because I don't use this anymore. But Yi Seong as a primary is totally cool in the early game, but is a terrible idea in the late game because it marks you as someone who doesn't know what they're doing or an early game player, and people will just focus you out. So what are good pairings for Yi Seong? So if you're in the early game, I will say very obviously that like pair with archers, right? So your perfect ideal scenario would be something like Yi Seong with El Cid, or even better would be Thutmose. I believe you would want him as the primary for the support tree, and then Yi Seong as the secondary. And those pairings will be fantastic. Neither of them really does as much skill damage as Yi Seong wants to be enhancing, but these are your legendary early game archers. Yes, very obviously, pairing with them is going to go well. In addition, both Thutmose and El Cid have a march speed boost. So for Thutmose here, it is 10% when you're outside of territory. It's 10% march speed and 15% bonus when you're outside of territory. So outside of territory means you target land that is not your alliance's territory. Literally where you right click is not alliance territory. That's how that speed is determined. You do not speed up when your troops are hovering over alliance territory. Like your speed only changes based on where you right click. That's a big pro tip, by the way. Consider smashing the subscribe button if you're getting value. All right. From here, El Cid I mentioned gives march speed, right? So 15%, and when he's low, you get another 25%. Big W. If you're looking at epic archers, Herman is good. He's got march speed. I like that. Good damage from Kusunoki, but no march speed. I'm not a big fan. It will be fine, but like speed is very important. Okay. In the early game, you're probably not going to have Kira in a very good spot as far as epics go. Kira is an epic that you are going to have to work on over time. So although that pairing could be okay, I'm not going to recommend it for the early game. I'm not going to recommend Joan. I'm not going to recommend Skippy, because these are commanders that don't actually do skill damage. So you want to stay away from that. I'm also not going to recommend Osman because there's no march speed, right? I'm not going to recommend Boudica, like same reasons here. And that's also why, even though commanders like Freddy, Caesar, you've got Mehmed, some of them do skill damage. I'm not going to recommend Yi Seong as a pairing with them. They have no march speed. It's not go well. Caesar especially has almost no skill damage at all, so that doesn't make any sense. Mehmed does have skill damage, but let me tell you, from experience, that combo is too slow in the open field. Find somewhere else to put your Mehmed. Find somewhere else to put your Freddy, if that's what you want to do. Even though in the very early game, people could have argued that like the most skill damage you could crank out was Yi Seong and Freddy together, actually. So that combo had merits once upon a time. I feel like we're not really in that time anymore. Not really, all right? Now, once you get to like the mid-early game, like KVK Season 2, you'll see a bunch of other combinations with Yi Seong that do very well. For example, you will see Alexander the Great primary with Yi Seong secondary. And it like sounds weird, but it totally works. You'll see combos like Saladin, okay, Saladin with Yi Seong secondary, and it totally works. As I said earlier in the video, you can get away with these things because Yi Seong doesn't have that many skills that are dependent on having archers. It's just this one. But once you get to the end game, that calculus changes, my friends. That calculus changes dramatically. So where is Yi Seong good in the end game? So because he has no march speed, I would recommend that you pair him with a commander that has march speed. The most common pairing is Boudica Prime with Yi Seong. That is one of the most common pairings you will see. Now, that said, Boudica Prime, at the time of this recording, is no longer the best archer commander in the endgame. That spot is reserved for Zhuge Liang or Hermann Prime, okay? Those are your best endgame archers, and your best case situation is quite frankly going to be pairing Zhuge Liang with Hermann Prime. Like, you just put the two of them together and you're done. But if you were just getting to the end game, you could work on Hermann Prime. You could use Yi Seong as the secondary, and like eventually you work on Zhuge Liang, and that's a strategy. Okay, that's one way you could do it. Another way that you could do it is you continue to use Yi Seong behind commanders that are not archers. I just really don't like it. Like the way you do this is you get to the end game, you double relic Yi Seong as fast as you can, and then you need someone to put Yi Seong with, and I think Hermann Prime is honestly gotta be your best bet. He does big skill damage, and he's got great march speed and defensive stats. That's gotta be the play. Now, there is one other early game combo I didn't talk about, and it's so weird, and it works so well that, like, I don't know, for a time this was meta-defining. I don't know if it still is, but Yi Seong with Tommy is insane. And for whatever reason, this combination of commanders absolutely freaking slaps in the early game. I think it's in part because infantry are so good in the early game, and it kind of counters them. But people use that as a garrison, Yi Seong with Tommy, and that may still be, to this day, one of the best garrisons you can make in the early seasons of KVK. Now, once you get to KVK Season 3, that's all out the window. But Tommy does some cool stuff. She does a damage factor that is based on stacking poisons from her 4th skill. She also has a skill related to hitting cities. It doesn't matter. She's still really good. So even though this skill is irrelevant for garrisoning, doesn't matter. She gives a nice attack boost for your archers. She has a chance to reduce the defense of the enemy. And when expertised, she does 10% more attack, 10% more counterattack, and when you're hit with a basic attack, cavalry units lose 10% attack until they stop attacking. It's a weird combination that just works really, really well. Another early game combination that, like, I just wouldn't recommend for most people is going to be Edward of Woodstock with Yi Seong. Edward of Woodstock, in my opinion, has just no end game viability. He's kind of a weirdo. He does a very, very slow skill cycle, and that's just really bad in today's meta. Now, obviously, in the end game, there are lots of different legendary archer commanders like Gilgamesh, Cyrus, Ramses, Nebu, Artemisia, but these aren't even commanders that you would remotely consider really investing in right now. There's also Ashurbanipal. You've got Henry. Yi Seong will work with a lot of these commanders. Like, Yi Seong will work with Ash. Yi Seong will work with Henry. Yi Seong will definitely work behind Cyrus, Ramses, Nebu. The thing is that, like, those are endgame combinations you can use, but these days there's just no reason to start investing in these commanders. It's not even really a conversation about Artemisia. And these days, leadership has gone in the direction of being garrison for your city, not even open field. So you could have made an argument for like Yi Seong Honda, even though I would not at all recommend that. But like, it's not even really a conversation anymore for what you could do. And gosh, one other commander, Ethel. I mean, I guess in the early game, a popular Canyon combo was Ethel with Yi Seong, and it works shockingly well. And that's because of that secret I shared with you about Ethel, where her skill damage is not reduced based on hitting more targets. Very, very powerful. But that's not really the topic of this video. So back on topic for this video, let's talk about archer equipment. And let's talk very briefly about formations and what you want to prioritize for Yi Seong. Okay, so as far as archer equipment goes, money where my mouth is, I just moved all in on the legendary archer set. GG easy. End game ring and horn is meta. So this that you see on the screen is the meta approach. Okay, now if you really move all in and you get the end game KVK helmet and the end game KVK weapon, those will be better once you have them both crit. So you need the special talent on really both of these to be worth losing out on the set bonus from archers. The other archer approach that I do have to mention is that you might make this right here, like I have it on the armor and the weapon, but instead of these legs and these boots, you go for the leadership set. This is popular because the leadership set has health. I personally am just sticking with the archer stuff, but there are some very staunch archer advocates that will say it's just better. And arguably, it might be slightly better. The reason is that, and this is like, again, another topic I've covered way in depth. So if you like this kind of stuff, subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to teach a lot of it without repeating videos I've already done. But basically, stats have diminishing returns. The more you get of a stat, the less valuable more of that stat becomes. So because health is the lowest stat pretty much everywhere in the game, and that is because your alliance buffs don't give you much health. You might get some from some holy sites, but not from the alliance technology. Your health is basically always behind everything else. So health is pretty much the best stat in the game for getting a balanced and best possible boost to your overall effectiveness. This is, of course, a very nuanced conversation that I've literally spent like hours discussing and many more hours investigating. So you can check out my other videos for more detail on that. Now, if you're looking at this set and you're like, bruh, get to a relatable place, please. What is the early game equipment? No worries, I got your back. We can get a quick look here and we can talk about it. When you get to epics, the golden age, you will use for a very long time. It is very good. Before you get to epics, the Staff of the Lost is a great place to be. All right. From here, we get a look at the armor. And for your helmet, the Helm of the Phoenix at the green tier is actually kind of insane how good it is. 4% of stats, talent that's bad boy was going to be at least 5%, right? Maybe 5.5%. That's a great place to be. Your only upgrade from there is going to be to the Revival Helmet. And the Revival Helmet is amazing. The crazy thing about archers is they're like the only ones with an epic set. And that epic set's really good. So eventually you're going to get to this epic set and you're just going to enjoy the bonuses here, right? You get the helmet, get the chest, gloves, boots, or legs, and you're in a great spot. Now, on the topic of boots for archers, I just told you health is the best stat. Well, boom. Here's some health, baby. Unfortunately for archers, when we look at like what's good at the blue tier, you have literally nothing. So it's kind of a big jump in materials, but once you get there, super worth. Gray tier, I mean, you could start out with the sturdy boots. In fact, you're going to have to do a little of that. Edged boots are a little bit of an upgrade. The barb damage is kind of nice. It ain't much of an upgrade, though. In fact, it might not even be an upgrade at all. 2.5% attack versus 2% defense. I think I'd honestly kind of prefer the defense. That might kind of be the play here. So get to these epic boots and you're in a freaking sweet spot. Legs, you have a great choice. Blue legs are very good. Don't have really a green option, so you're going to need to make the Greaves of Exile. Gloves, you actually have an amazing green option. Archer health on these gloves is insane. Very, very good. You can upgrade eventually to a Saint Song. But then from there, I mean, I think you just go straight to Revival as your play. That's totally the play here. For your chest piece, you actually have some interesting options. Start with the gray for the Archer attack. You can upgrade from there to the Commander's heavy armor. Because this has health, it's good for a long time. But because you have the epic set, hey, yo, you're going to move into that epic set pretty quickly, all right? So that covers most of the armor, and when you are upgrading to legendary equipment, you really kind of want to keep the epic boots for as long as you can. You kind of want to keep the revival helmet and chest piece, which, is it the chest? No, maybe it's the leg. The legs? Yeah, the legs giving you defense. So like the helmet and legs you want to keep for the defense boost, and then you get the set bonus. But then the chest and the gloves you're going to want to replace. So one of the first upgrades you'll do to the legendary tier when you get there is going to be the Dragon's Breath chest and Dragon's Breath gloves, right? And that's going to be a really nice upgrade, especially because the revival gloves are worth doing, but they give a variety of stats instead of all archer stats. So getting this upgrade is actually very sizable. You got a base of 4.5% attack here to a base of 7.5% attack. Granted, you would go talent this, so it's like 5.5% attack or whatever, but I think you get the idea. Like, that's your first legendary upgrade. Chest piece, set, gloves from the set, all right? Now, in terms of formations and armaments, I will be very brief here. This is something that will become available to you later on, so if it's not available yet, don't sweat it. You're going to want to use the wedge formation, and bonuses to all damage and skill damage are very, very good. So this is my current, I think, best wedge archer set. It's pretty sweet. You get a lot of inscriptions in here. Look for all damage in this flag slot. You can get a lot of it there. Of course, health is nice. Double inscriptions are nice, but sometimes you end up with stats of the wrong troop type, and it kind of is what it is, all right? If you enjoyed the vid, throw a like on here, consider subscribing. If you have any other thoughts, comments, or questions about Yi Seong, definitely drop a comment. And again, any of that helps out my channel a ton, which if you got value from this video, I deeply appreciate you doing any of those things. Tossing a like, subscribing to the channel, or dropping a comment. And if you're looking for, as of the time of this recording, my latest guidance around what the meta looks like in Rise of Kingdoms, I make a tier list that I update every single month. Card will be in the end screen for that as I smash my microphone. So thank you for smashing the like button. I smashed my microphone. Whoopsies. We're good here. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom. Oh, and if you want to see me defending my city with Yi Seong, card in the end screen for that as well. That was crazy. My city got swarmed.